Hey there, I'm Sammy and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I have something super exciting to share with you guys. I have finally got my hands on an Art Deco dresser. So just keep watching to see exactly how I transformed it. This is the piece that we are starting with. It is a beautiful Art Deco tall dresser. I am super excited to be working on this piece and hopefully I can do something really creative with it. She's definitely seen some better days, has lots of dust, some cobwebs, but structurally is in pretty good condition, has some dings and some veneer peeling, but overall in really great shape. The drawers are made with a dovetail type of style, so everything is very structurally sound. It wasn't until right here I kind of started to notice something was different. I noticed that the top drawer was just different than the others, and if you don't know this, Art Deco has really beautiful wood grain on it, and that's why I was so excited to be working on it. So you'll see here just a second when I come to realize what has been done to this dresser. And this is the moment that it hit me. This dresser has been worked on before. Somebody has removed and replaced all of the veneer on that top drawer, hence why there's only one handle instead of two. There used to be two handles and I was really confused because there was two holes on either side for two drawer pulls, and there was one on the center that you could see from the inside of the drawer, meaning they replaced this veneer, covered up the existing holes, and made new ones with just one. I'm not sure if that's because they were missing hardware and the veneer was damaged. I don't know, but I was really disappointed to come across this. Moving on, I knew I would come up with a plan here or there, so I started removing the rest of the hardware to see what else was in store. This is what the hardware looked like, and it was in two pieces, so you could also remove the top and just leave it with that, but I wasn't sure. I set those aside while I gave the rest of the dresser a good, nice clean. I'm just using some simple green and some wet rags here to wipe everything down really well before we go in with a sandpaper. On one of the sides of the dresser, it was almost like that there was tape there before, so there was 3 lines that were really sticky and had a lot of residue on it. So I grabbed my scraper and sprayed some simple green on that and got to scraping, and I got the majority of it off. That way my sander wouldn't get gunked up too much. Then I sprayed down all of the drawer fronts and gave those a good clean, and you can even see at this angle here that that top drawer just isn't the same as the other ones. You can see the wood grain, and it's even a little bit of a different shade. Then I went into the rest of the dresser, making sure I was getting all of the detailed areas. This one had a lot of grooves on the front of the dresser. I just wanted to give it a good thorough clean so that sanding would be just a little bit easier. Then I moved on to sanding the drawer fronts, and for this I am using a 120 grit sandpaper. I want to be very careful removing this old stain. Now, like I said, this being an Art Deco piece, it has really beautiful wood grain, and I really wanted it to keep that. I already knew that I was gonna have to cover up that top drawer because it was just not giving us anything good to go off of, so we were gonna cover that up with paint, and hopefully I could salvage the other 4 drawers on this dresser. As I got into sanding more, you can start to see that these edges are burnt off, and now that is not from me. I wouldn't have burnt through that easily, and I could see them all around each drawer. They were all already burnt off. So This is from the previous person working on it, so you can see here all of the burn off edges. And yes, I could go in later and fill that in, but that's just a lot of tedious, time-consuming work. So I needed to think of a different plan to salvage this wood. In the meantime, I got to sanding the sides of the dresser base, and you can see here at the bottom there was quite a bit of damage in the veneer. Some of it was peeling, some of it was missing, and these little white spots are what the previous owner had tried to fill with their wood filler. So in sanding, I wanted to make sure I removed most of that. Then for the larger chunks of veneer that was peeling, I grabbed some wood glue and I stuck that underneath the piece as well as I could. This would probably be a lot easier if you had a smaller syringe. I just didn't have any on hand. So I placed some glue underneath and got it well covered, and then I removed the excess and put a clamp on it to let it dry. While that was drying, I moved on to filling some larger sections with Bondo. Bondo is a two-part mixture, so you're going to mix the hardener in with the cream and it's going to harden. So you got to work quickly with this stuff. So I'm trying to get it on here as quickly as I can, and then you give it about 15 minutes or so and it will be ready to sand. I love using this stuff. It is super strong once it dries, so I know using it on the bottom and base of this dresser, we will have no issues come years down the road. While the Bondo was setting, I went ahead and started sanding the front of the dresser. There's a lot of grooves and tiny nooks to get in, so for this I will be hand sanding, but I'm using my sanding block here, which is nice and padded with a 120 grit sandpaper on it, and I'm always making sure to use my gloves because I may not realize it when I'm sanding, but afterwards your hands will be pretty beat up. So my plan for the dresser base is to paint it. There was quite a bit of damage, so there wasn't really a lot of salvaging it. It was just much easier to kind of sand everything, and we're going to give it a nice good coat of paint. So for this, all it needs is a scuff sand, but it's a little more time consuming than your typical scuff sand because there's just so many detailed areas. So take your time, put on some music, and just make sure you're covering every inch of the piece. There was a lot of dents in the front base of the dresser, so I'm just going in here quickly with some wood filler, using my finger to really work it in and make sure I get them all covered. Now that the Bondo has dried, I'm going in with my orbital sander using a 120 grit sandpaper to remove the bulk of it and smooth the surface over so that it's ready for paint. And then I'm continuing to go over the rest of the dresser here with a 220 grit sandpaper, so that is prepped for paint. There were some areas that I needed to go back and refill, and you might notice that this is a different color. I'm still using Bondo, it's just a different kind. The first kind that you saw was a all-purpose Bondo, and this one here is specifically a wood filler. I particularly don't find that there's a big difference when I'm using it to work with furniture, but this is just the one that I had on hand. Now, there was one section that I was going to leave natural wood on the dresser base, and that is the top. It was in really good shape, so I thought I would sand the old finish off and restain it to match the drawer fronts. For the edges here, I'm just going in and hand sanding those, and that took me some time, but I finally got it done, and then I went in with my orbital sander and finished up the rest. Then I made sure to go in with my block and sandpaper combo to get these edges and grooves right here to make sure I was covering every inch of this with some sandpaper. I still needed to go back and sand the front base that I had filled earlier with all the wood filler, so I'm just going in with my sandpaper block and smoothing over the surface, getting rid of any excess wood filler that there is so it's nice and smooth for a coat of paint. Then finishing off the sanding by going over the Bondo that we filled earlier and smoothing everything out so it's nice and level, and everything will blend seamlessly when we put a coat of paint on top of this. One trick I always like to do, if it's on a bottom edge or any kind of edge, I'll finish it off with my sanding block just so it's a little softer than going in with my orbital sander, which might take off too much. Then, as always, I'm grabbing my air compressor hose to blow the majority of the dust off. That way it's much easier to wipe down. Then I'm going in with a wet rag and giving everything a thorough cleaning so that it collects any of the remaining dust left on the piece. That way we're left with a nice and clean piece and we don't have any dust particles in our paint. Then, because I'm keeping the top wood and I'm painting the rest, I need to cover the top. So I'm starting off by taping off the edges with green frog tape. This stuff gives a really nice clean edge, so whenever I'm painting and trying to protect something, I will use the frog tape. For a perfect line, I'm using an X-Acto knife to remove any excess tape, so I'm left with a nice and straight line. And then to cover the rest, I'm using the 3M plastic roll, and I just cut a piece to size, laid it down, and then I'm laying a piece of tape on all of the edges to secure it. And that way we're left with nice clean lines after we paint the piece. First, I'm going in with a filler primer. This is the Rust-Oleum Automotive Primer, and I'm just using this on some areas that I felt like needed a little bit more fill and a little forgiveness. So I'm just touching up those areas, and then I'm going to go in with a different primer on the rest of the piece. You know who made it. The other primer that I'm going to be using is the Zinsser Bullseye 123 primer. Now this is a great overall primer. I'm using the can here just because I had some on hand, and it is a darker gray finish. This is what you want to use if you're going to use a darker color paint. They also have a white one as well if you're using a light colored paint. But I'm covering the entire surface of the base with this primer. Next, I'm going to be using this little handy clipping tool for small pieces of wood, and I'm using small pieces of pine accent boards, and this is going to be like a added trim around all the edges of the drawer fronts. This is the idea that I came up with to still salvage this beautiful wood grain, but cover up what was burnt through on the veneer of the edges of the drawers. So I'm just measuring here what the length needs to be and then snipping them really quickly with this tool. It was super effortless to use, and I actually thought it was a lot of fun. Before gluing them down, I'm going to stain the drawer fronts. So I'm going in with this Varathane Early American wood stain, and I'm applying this all over the drawer faces until I get an even finish. Early American is a very popular wood stain. You see a lot of furniture flippers using it. I think it's just an overall very well-rounded color, and you can use it on many different types of woods, wood grains, and it looks really great in the end, and it gives you a very nice finish. Moving back to the dresser base, I let that primer dry, and now I'm going in with a sanding block to go over the entire surface. You could see while I was priming this that there was a lot of spray off, and that usually happens when you're using an aerosol can, and it happens in general if you're spraying paint, but more so with aerosol paint cans. So you want to make sure to go back and sand off any of little paint nodules that are kind of on the surface, giving you a bumpy texture. We want a nice and smooth texture for our next coat of paint. And in general, you always want to go ahead and sand between coats. Then I blew everything off really quickly with my air compressor to remove a majority of that dust, and then I went in with a wet rag to collect any remaining dust left on the surface. That way our paint would adhere nice and smoothly. There's one last thing I needed to do before I could paint everything, and for the top drawer that I'm going to be painting with the dresser base, I wanted to fill these corners where the wood meets, just so it gives it a nice seamless look. So I'm just tossing some wood filler in there. It dries super quickly, and then I'm going in and sanding it really quickly to smooth everything over. Then I laid out my painting tarp and laid everything out. These are all the trim pieces that I'm going to be painting. And then I have my dresser base and the dresser drawer, and I got to painting my first and only coat of paint. This is a color black that I have used in previous pieces, and I've said it and I'll say it again. I think this is my new favorite black. I will be using this for whenever I need to paint a piece a dark pigmented black. It's just very pigmented. Like I said, I only needed one coat with this piece, and that is saving me so much time. For the trim detail pieces, I did end up spraying these. I thought it would just go a lot quicker. I had some trouble because it uses air to push the paint out, and so they were getting blown away a little bit, especially the smaller pieces, but I did get them all covered eventually. Now for the most satisfying part, peeling off the tape, and I was left with a perfect clean line because of this green frog tape. And then I'm going in with that same early American stain that I used for the drawers, and I'm using that on the top of the dresser so that everything matches seamlessly. Now it is time to attach the trim pieces to the drawer fronts, and for this I'm just using Titebond wood glue. I applied just a little bit on the back because I don't want a ton oozing out when I go to set this down, because I don't want there to be excess glue drying on the drawer fronts. So I applied a thorough layer, not too much, not too little, and then I taped them all down, making sure that they had compression throughout the entire piece of trim, and I let those dry, and they were super strong. I didn't need to use any kind of brad nails. This glue really did the trick, and they are not coming off. Then I put the drawers back in, and it was all starting to come together, and I'm loving the way this is turning out. But last thing we need to do is add a top coat. So I'm just going in with a satin finish polyurethane. I put this in my sprayer, and I'm giving the whole thing a thorough coat. Now you may look at this and be quite scared because of the way the finish is looking, but don't worry, that will all dry and it'll look nice and smooth, and there won't be any different in the color variations. And this is what we were looking like once that top coat had finally dried. So I brought it inside and got to moving on to the hardware. This is the hardware that I chose. I feel like it was just simple and elegant, and so I am adding on the hardware to all of these drawer faces. And then it was finally time for staging. As always, I keep it super simple just so I can actually enjoy the piece. This turned out amazing, way better than I would have expected once I figured out what had happened to this dresser previously, and I am just amazed by the outcome. Just to give you a quick reminder of what we started off with so you can really appreciate what we are ending with.
Thank you all so much for watching. I hope that you really enjoyed this video. I sure had a lot of fun making it over, and I'm so glad I can check redoing an Art Deco piece off of my bucket list. I will leave a profit breakdown in the description below, as well as a list of my most used tools, so go check that out if you're interested. But as for now, I'll see you in the next video. Bye!